The last of the water had been a mouthful of warm dust 2 days ago. Jonah Cade's horse, a good mare named Clementine, favored her left foreleg, and the rhythm of her limping gait was the only sound in the vast, shimmering heat of the Nevada territory. He'd been following a dry creek bed, a fool's hope, when he saw it. Not a town, not really. Just a collection of low, earth-colored buildings nestled in a wrinkle of the hills, looking as if they'd been baked right out of the ground itself. There was no signpost, no wagon road leading to it. It was a place that did not want to be found. But with a dying horse and a tongue thick as leather, Jonah had no choice but to be the man who found it. As he drew closer, the settlement resolved into an impossibility. The buildings were angular, with sloping roofs unlike any he'd seen. Paper lanterns, bleached and torn by the sun, hung from a few eaves, and the people who stopped their work to watch him approach were all Chinese. Men in loose-fitting dark trousers and women with their hair in severe dark knots stared with an unnerving stillness. He was an outsider, a white man with a Colt revolver strapped to his hip, and their silence was a wall as solid as any stockade. He dismounted, his own legs unsteady, and led Clementine toward a communal well in the center of the dusty square. A young man, barely more than a boy, stepped forward. His English was clipped, but clear. "You are lost." It was a statement, not a question. "My horse needs water," Jonah said, his voice a dry rasp. "I need water." The young man glanced at the colt, then back at Jonah's face. He conferred in rapid, musical tones with an older man who had emerged from the largest building. This man was ancient, his face a road map of deep lines, a thin white beard hanging from his chin. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his eyes holding a sharpness that belied his age. He was clearly the one in charge. After a moment, the old man gave a short, sharp nod. The boy gestured to the well. "Water? For you? For the horse? Then you see Mr. Way." Jonah drank until his stomach ached, letting the cool water wash the grit from his throat. He saw to Clementine, who drank greedily, her sides heaving. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him, a weight of scrutiny that was heavier than the afternoon sun. Once the animals were tended to, the young man led him into the main building. It was a trading post of sorts, but stocked with unfamiliar goods, dried herbs, strange vegetables, and bolts of silk alongside sacks of rice and barrels of salted fish. Mr. Way sat behind a simple wooden table, a clay cup of tea steaming before him. He gestured for Jonah to sit. The young man, whose name was Shen, stood beside the table to translate. For an hour, Jonah answered questions. Where did he come from? Nowhere in particular. Where was he going? Wherever the trail led. Did he have money? He had a few dollars, but he knew they were worthless here. He had a skill with a gun, but that was a currency best left unspoken. He was a drifter, a man whose past was a shadow he kept at his back. Mr. Way listened, his eyes never leaving Jonah's, his expression unreadable. Finally, the old man spoke at length. His voice was low and gravelly, like stones rolling in a riverbed. Shin listened intently before turning to Jonah. "Mr. Way understands your situation," Shin said. "This place, we call it Dragon's Tooth. It is our home. We do not welcome outsiders. They bring trouble." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But your horse is lame. The desert is wide. To leave now is to die." Jonah waited. He knew an offer was coming, and it would have a price. "We can offer you a place," Shin continued. "Food, water, a place to sleep. We will help your horse. You can stay until she is healed. Until the summer heat breaks." Jonah felt a cautious relief unknot in his chest. "I'd be grateful." "Gratitude is not enough," Shen said, his tone flat. "Mr. Wei requires a service, a pact." The old man clapped his hands once. A door behind him opened, and a young woman stepped out. She was small, and she wore a traditional dress of light pink silk, the fabric frayed at the hem and smudged with dust. Her black hair was simply tied, and she kept her eyes fixed on the floorboards. She looked no older than 18. There was a stillness about her, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the rigid quiet of a trapped bird. "This is my daughter, May," Shen translated, though the old man's gaze made the introduction clear. "She is a dishonor to this family. She is rejected by our ways." Jonah looked from the father to the daughter. He saw nothing dishonorable about her. He saw a girl who looked scared and profoundly alone. The way the other villagers had stared at him was with suspicion. The way they did not look at her was with something far colder, dismissal. Mr. Wei spoke again, his voice hard. Shen translated the words one by one, like dropping stones into a quiet pool. "He says you are a man without a tribe, without a place, a ghost. She is a daughter without a family, without a future, a ghost in her own home." Jonah's hand instinctively drifted toward the worn grip of his Colt. He didn't like where this was going. Shen took a deep breath. "Mr. Wei offers you a life. He offers her a life. He says, 'Marry my rejected daughter or leave Dragon's Tooth now.'" The words hit the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. Jonah froze in his chair. He looked at the old man's unyielding face, then at the girl who stood trembling slightly, her gaze still fastened to the floor. He saw the desperation of his own situation mirrored in the impossible demand. Marry a stranger, a girl cast out by her own people, or walk back into the sun-scorched emptiness to die. The chief of Dragon's Tooth had laid a trap, and Jonah had walked right into it with the first sip of water. Jonah spent the night in a small, windowless room at the back of the trading post. Sleep wouldn't come. The ultimatum echoed in his mind, a nonsensical riddle posed in a language he didn't understand. He was a gunslinger, a man who solved problems with speed and lead. He knew how to read a poker hand, a trail, a man's eyes before he drew. He didn't know the first thing about this. To accept was to tie himself to this strange place and a woman he didn't know, a woman her own father had branded a disgrace. To refuse was to sentence himself and his horse to a slow, certain death in the desert. The next morning he decided he needed to understand the terms of his potential prison. He walked through the small settlement, observing. The people of Dragon's Tooth were industrious, moving with a quiet purpose. They tended neat garden plots, repaired tools in a makeshift smithy, and worked a small but productive mining claim in the nearby hills. They were a closed circle, and he was a foreign object dropped into their midst. But it was May who drew his attention. She worked apart from the others, mending fishing nets near the small, sluggish creek that gave the town its life. No one spoke to her. When she passed, others would turn their heads, their faces becoming blank masks. She was invisible, a ghost, just as her father had said. He approached her cautiously. She didn't look up until his shadow fell over her work. When she did, her eyes were dark and guarded, but he saw a flicker of something else in their depths. Not fear, defiance. "I'm Jonah," he said, his voice quiet. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She did not offer her name. "Your father," he began, then stopped, unsure how to phrase the absurdity. "He made me an offer." For the first time, a bitter-looking smile touched her lips. It was not an offer. It was a command. Her English was perfect, without the slightest trace of an accent. It was clearer and more precise than Shen's, The sound of it was so unexpected, it startled him more than the ultimatum itself. Before he could respond, a new sound broke the morning quiet, the clatter of shod hooves and the loud, boisterous laughter of American voices. 3 riders appeared over the rise, rough-looking men with sun-scorched faces and dusty clothes, prospectors by the look of them. They rode into the center of the settlement as if they owned it, their eyes cataloging everything with a greedy sheen. The men of Dragon's Tooth gathered, their faces grim. They were farmers and miners, not fighters. Mr. Way emerged, with Shin at his side, his expression like stone. The leader of the prospectors, a big man with a tobacco-stained beard, spat on the ground. "Well, look what we got here," he boomed. "A whole town of Celestials, sitting on who knows what." He pointed a grimy finger at Mr. Way. "We need supplies, old man. Flour, bacon, whiskey, and we ain't paying your prices." Shin began to translate, but the man waved him off. He understands greed. It's a universal language. The prospector's eyes scanned the crowd and landed on May. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "And look at that, a pretty little flower hiding in the dirt." He started to dismount, his intentions clear. Jonah's muscles tensed. He had seen this scene play out a dozen times in a dozen dusty towns. It always ended in violence. His hand moved, hovering over the butt of his Colt. He was 1 man against 3, but the odds weren't impossible. But then May moved. She stood up, dropping the net she was mending. She walked forward, placing herself between her father and the prospectors. She did not look at Jonah. She did not look at her father. She looked directly into the eyes of the bearded man. "You will take your horses and you will leave," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the air with the sharp edge of fine steel. The prospector laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "And who are you to tell me what to do, little girl?" "My name is Mayway," she said, her chin held high, "and this land is held under a deed filed with the territorial office in Carson City, registered to the Dragon's Tooth Mining Cooperative under the Homestead Act of 1862. The U.S. Marshal for this district, a Mr. Patterson, is a personal acquaintance of our legal counsel in San Francisco. If you or your men so much as touch a single grain of rice without proper payment, I will see you charged with theft. If you threaten anyone here, I will see you charged with assault. Marshal Patterson takes his duties and federal claims very seriously." The flow of perfect, legalistic English from this small Chinese woman in a tattered pink dress was so utterly unexpected that it stunned the prospectors into silence. The leader's jaw hung slack. He looked from her to his companions, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He was a bully and a thief, but he knew the law, even out here, had long arms. The mention of a specific marshal's name gave her threat a weight he couldn't easily dismiss. Jonah saw his moment. He didn't draw, but he let his coat fall open, his hand resting on his gun belt. He stepped forward to stand beside her, a silent confirmation of her words. He was the part of the equation the prospectors understood. She was the mind, he was the muscle. Together, they presented a unified and suddenly dangerous front. The bearded man's face turned a blotchy red. He was outmaneuvered, made to look a fool, and he knew it. He spat on the ground again, a gesture of empty defiance. "This ain't over," he snarled. He wrenched his horse's head around. "Let's go. There's easier pickings down the trail." They galloped away in a cloud of dust and curses. The silence they left behind was thick with astonishment. The people of Dragon's Tooth stared at May as if seeing her for the first time. "Mister." Way's face was a mask of conflicting emotions, shock, pride, and a deep, furrowed confusion. The immediate danger had passed, but Jonah knew it was only a reprieve. Men like that carried grudges. They would be back, and likely with more men. He looked at May, who now seemed smaller, the rigid posture draining out of her. The crisis had revealed a core of strength he could never have guessed at. It also deepened the mystery surrounding her. He walked over to her as the crowd began to disperse, muttering amongst themselves. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" he asked, his voice low. May looked up at him, and the defiant fire was gone from her eyes. In its place was a profound and guarded sorrow, a weariness that seemed too heavy for her small frame. She simply shook her head and turned away, walking back to her abandoned nets without another word. He was left with the knowledge that the girl her father wanted to marry off to a stranger was the town's most formidable weapon, and no one, least of all Jonah, understood why. That evening a summons came. Mr. Way wanted to see him. Jonah entered the main building to find the old man waiting, just as before. But this time, May was already there, standing beside her father's chair, her expression impassive. She was to be the translator. The pretense of using Shin was gone. This was to be a direct conversation. "My father wishes to know your answer," May said, her voice devoid of emotion. She did not look at him, but addressed a point on the wall just over his shoulder. "Before I answer, I have questions," Jonah replied, meeting Mr. Way's gaze. "I want to know why. Why her? Why me?" May translated. The old man listened, his eyes narrowed. He spoke for a long time, his voice a low murmur. Jonah watched May's face, looking for a sign of what was being said, but she remained a stoic mask. Finally, she turned her empty gaze back toward the wall. "When I was a child," she began, her voice a monotone, as if reciting a story about someone else, "my father saw that the world was changing. The railroad was coming. More Americans. He believed we needed a bridge, someone who could speak their language, understand their laws, and protect our people. He sent me away to a mission school in San Francisco." The words hung in the air. A mission school. It explained everything and nothing. "I lived there for 10 years, she continued. "I learned to read and write. I learned your history, your laws. I learned your ways. When I returned last year, I was a stranger." She paused, and for a fleeting moment a crack appeared in her composure. "I was no longer Chinese enough for my people, but I would never be American enough for yours. I exist in no world." Mr. Way grunted, adding a sharp comment. "He says I came back with a disobedient heart," May translated, a faint trace of bitterness coloring her words. "Before I was sent away, a marriage was arranged for me with the son of a community leader to the north. It was an important alliance. It would have secured trade routes and offered mutual protection. When I returned, I was expected to honor this agreement. The man, he was not a kind person. I refused." Jonah finally understood. It wasn't a crime she had committed. It was a choice. A choice that, in this tightly knit traditional community, was the same as a crime. She had placed her own will above the good of the community, above the authority of her father. She had brought shame on him, voided a critical alliance, and made herself an outcast. "He could not cast me out completely," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I am still his blood. But I could not be allowed to remain as a symbol of defiance. I became a ghost, unseen, unspoken to." "And me?" Jonah asked gently. "Where do I fit in?" Mr. Way spoke again, his tone softer this time. "He saw you ride in," May translated, "a man alone, a man who, like me, is outside the boundaries of society, a man with a gun who knows how to use it. After what happened today, he knows the prospectors will return. He is old. Our men are not fighters. He needs a protector for this town. For me. The proposal was not about marriage, not really. It was a contract, a cold, practical transaction. Jonah's gun and his outsider status in exchange for May's life and a home for them both. He would be her guardian, and in doing so, he would become the guardian of Dragon's Tooth. It was a life sentence, but it was also a life. May reached into a fold of her dress and pulled out a small book. Its cover was worn soft, the title barely legible, a simple English primer. "This is what he sent me away for," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she quickly suppressed. "And this is what he rejected me for." The quiet of the room was broken by a commotion outside. Shin burst through the door, his face pale with alarm. "Mr. Way! Riders are coming! It is Chin!" A cold dread settled in the room. May's body went rigid. "Chin is the man I refused to marry," she said to Jonah, her voice tight. "His father is a powerful man." They stepped outside. A party of 5 riders was entering the square. They were Chinese, but they were armed with rifles and moved with a swaggering confidence the men of Dragon's Tooth lacked. Their leader was a young man, handsome in a severe way, who dismounted and strode toward Mr. Way. He bowed, but it was a gesture of mockery, his smile thin and unpleasant. This was Chin. He spoke, his words polite, but his tone dripping with condescension. May did not translate, but Jonah could feel the threat. Chin was using the incident with the prospectors as a pretext. He was here to offer his protection, to reassert his claim. He gestured toward May, then toward Jonah, a dismissive flick of his wrist. He was clearing the board, taking advantage of their weakness. The people of Dragon's Tooth looked on, their faces a mixture of fear and hope. To them, Chin represented a return to order, a proper solution. An alliance with his people would make them strong. May's defiance had brought them trouble with the Americans. Chin was the cure. The social pressure was immense. Jonah could feel the entire community siding against them. Chin spoke directly to Mr. Way, his voice hardening into a command. He was demanding his bride, the price of his protection. Mr. Way looked at his daughter, his face a mask of agony. He was trapped between the old world and the new, between his honor and his love for the daughter he had rejected. Jonah looked at May. She stood straight and tall, but he could see the terror in her eyes. She was about to be sacrificed to save her people, her brief moment of triumph against the prospectors erased by the weight of tradition. He had a choice. He could mount Clementine and ride away. No one would stop him. He owed these people nothing. He could be a ghost again, free and alone. Or he could stand his ground. He stepped forward, moving to stand between Chin and May. He didn't draw his weapon. He didn't need to. He simply looked at Mr. Way. "Tell your father," he said to May, his voice calm and steady, "that I accept his offer." May stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Tell him," Jonah repeated. Her voice trembled as she translated his words. A shocked silence fell over the square. Chin's face contorted in a snarl of fury. Mr. Way looked from Jonah to his daughter, and a slow, profound understanding dawned in his old eyes. He had offered a contract, but Jonah had just made a choice. He had chosen a side. He had chosen her. In that moment, Jonah Cade, the drifter, stopped drifting. He had cost himself his freedom, made a powerful enemy, and tied his fate to a woman he barely knew. But as he stood there, with May at his back and the hostile eyes of 2 different worlds upon him, he felt more grounded than he had in years. He had found a place worth defending. 6 months later, the first snows of winter dusted the high peaks surrounding Dragon's Tooth. The biting wind that swept through the settlement no longer felt like a threat, but a familiar part of the rhythm of life. The dugout cabin Jonah had built with his own hands at the edge of town was small but warm, its hearth always lit. He and May lived there in a quiet partnership, a space defined by respectful silence more than conversation. It was a marriage in name, a pact in practice. The town itself had changed. The prospectors, as predicted, had returned, their numbers doubled. But they had not found a soft target. Following Jonah's guidance, the men of Dragon's Tooth had constructed a defensible rock wall along the most vulnerable approach. They had learned to handle the few rifles the community owned with competence, not as fighters, but as men defending their homes. When the prospectors saw the new fortifications and the determined faces of the men behind them, they saw a fight that would be costly. They turned and left, and were not seen again. Chin's threat had dissolved more quietly. His power was based on the perception of Dragon's Tooth's weakness. When it became clear the settlement had its own protector and was no longer desperate, his offer of an alliance became irrelevant. He could not risk an open conflict with a community that now included an armed and capable American, not without inviting the very territorial authorities May had so expertly invoked. Chin lost face, and his visits ceased. May was no longer a ghost. The fear and awe she had inspired that day had slowly transformed into respect. She had started a small school in one of the communal buildings. Each afternoon, the children of Dragon's Tooth would gather, and with her worn English primer, she would teach them the words and letters of the new world their parents feared. She was building the bridge her father had always wanted. But she was building it on her own terms, from within her own community. She was not a disgrace. She was their future. One evening, Jonah returned from checking the perimeter, stamping the snow from his boots as he entered the cabin. The scent of pine smoke and cooking rice filled the small space. May was not at the table with her books. Instead, she sat on the floor, a slate board propped on her knees. In her hand was not a piece of chalk, but a brush, and beside her was a small stone bowl of black ink. She was practicing calligraphy, the graceful, flowing characters of her own language. Jonah walked over and looked down at the character she had just completed. It was complex and beautiful, a series of strokes that felt both ancient and alive. "What does that one mean?" he asked. She looked up at him, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. It was a rare sight, one that still caught him by surprise. "It means home," she said softly. He knelt beside her, the hard-packed dirt floor cold beneath his knees. He looked at the character she had drawn, a symbol of a world he would never fully understand. Then he looked at her face, illuminated by the firelight. He reached out and placed his calloused, scarred hand on the floor beside her smaller one. They did not touch. But in the space between them, a whole world of unspoken understanding existed. The ultimatum that had once felt like a prison had become the foundation of a life. A life isn't found in the world you're born to, or the one you run to. It is built, piece by piece, in the small, quiet space you and another person choose to defend together. And that brings us to the end of this one. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this one only get told because folks like you sit down and listen. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories from the old frontier, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and thanks again for being here.